Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of February of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Today is a very important date for Ukraine and the United States of America, because today very important agreement is going to be signed between the President of Ukraine and the President of the United States of America. Zelensky has arrived in the US, his plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base at night. Zelensky is scheduled to meet with senators today, and later he's going to have a meeting with Trump, followed by a signing ceremony for the agreement. And this is very important because of this negotiation process, because of this meeting, the Russians decided to intensify their activities along the entire line of combat contact. Currently, the Russians are at the state of major offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. Now let's discuss in details, and first let's talk about the Sudzha direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to take under complete control the settlements of Novaya Sorochina. The Russians captured the settlement of the northern part of Staraya Sorochina, and this information was confirmed both by pro-Russian and neutral resources. Once again, the Russians continue their unstoppable offensive operation. During the previous days, they managed to improve their positions significantly, and the Russians are not going to stop, because today, right before we start making the video, another pro-Russian, very reliable resource reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through the Ukraine defense belt in the area of Nikolaevka and to enter the central part of the settlement by the name of Malaya Loknya. So most likely during the next upcoming night between the 28th of February and the 1st of March, most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from this area, and they will try to move as close as possible to the settlements of Kazachia Loknya and the city of Sudzha itself. But the problem is that a bit further in the southwestern direction, another group of Russian forces managed to break through the Ukraine defense belt and to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Nikotsky. Most likely the Russians are not planning to stop, and they will continue their offensive operation further in the direction of the road between the settlement of Malaya Loknya and Kazachia Loknya. If the Russians this upcoming night are able to cut this road physically, then the Ukrainians that are currently located on the territory of Malaya Loknya would be caught in cordon without any possibilities for evacuation. And most likely this is exactly what the Russians are going to achieve, are trying to achieve during the next several days or even hours. So most likely this territory would be colored in Russian favor within the next several days. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly on the territory of the settlement of Lebedinka. We've been receiving updates of the same type probably for the previous 3 days. First, we got report that the Russians secured the most western part of the settlement. Then we got report that the Russians managed to secure the central part of the settlement. And today we got confirmation that the Russians secured the most western part. This information was provided us both by neutral and by pro-Russian resources. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians also decided not to stop their offensive operation, but one of the Russian groups managed to move further in the eastern direction, and currently there are very heavy clashes already on the outskirts of the settlement of the Kazachia Loknya. There are going to be very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians understand they can't lose these positions, because if they lose and if the Russians are able to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the northwestern part of Kazachia Loknya, this is going to be a complete cauldron not just for the Ukrainians that are currently located on the territory of Malaya Loknya. This is going to be a cauldron for much more bigger territories between Kazachia Loknya and Malaya Loknya itself. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the village of Novinka. This is already the Sumy region. This information today was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian resources. As you can see, the pro-Ukrainian service Deep State colored the territory of Novinka as a contested area or the gray zone, which means that there are very heavy clashes, and most likely the presence of the Russian forces on the territory of this village was recorded. Furthermore, this information was also confirmed by neutral mappers. The Russian sources reported that there are no soldiers, that there are no soldiers of the armed force of Russian Federation, neither the soldiers of the Russian army and the soldiers of Ukrainian army are present in this area, because this is just a very small village and there are no positions where both sides can dig in deeper. So that's why both sides try to control the tree lines and the fortifications around. Also, during the day, we got a lot of reports about the situation in the southern part, but we don't have any icons, but there were several articles published by the Russian side that there is also a very powerful major offensive operation in the direction of Guiva. Currently, the Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. If the Russians are able to take under control the settlement of Guiva and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the western direction, this is going to be the beginning of complete disaster and the end for the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of Sudzha, because by this attack the Russians will be able to shorten the distance to the main supply road N07, which means that Ukrainians will no longer be able to supply and support their forces in Sudzha without losses. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of updates. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under complete control the settlement by the name of Kalinova. This is a very small village that probably existed during the Soviet period of time. Now there is nothing here, but anyway, according to information we have, this village was captured by the Russians. And we see that now the Russians are able and have possibilities to attack further in the direction of Kindrashevka, and most likely the Russians will try to attack in the direction of Golubovka, because when talking about Golubovka, the Russians can attack this village along the main road between the settlement of Kalinova and Golubovka itself, and the Russians can try to cross the river of Oskol and to attack the same settlement from behind. And basically this is the beginning, already the beginning of the battle for the city of Kupiansk itself. The Russians during the previous 24 hours destroyed several pontoon bridges and crossings in this area with the purpose to reduce the Ukrainian logistic possibilities, because at the same time the Russians are trying to cut the pocket between the river of Oskol and the settlement of Stepovo Novoselka. Currently the Russians are trying to gain momentum of offensive operation from the east in the direction of the west. Most likely during the next several days we're going to receive some changes on the ground in this area as well. Furthermore, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how the Russians were flying with drones deep inside on the area of deep rear of the armored forces of Ukraine. Basically, the Russians are trying to understand what kind of forces the Ukrainians have in these fields, whether the Ukrainians in this part of Ukraine are able to stop and to slow down the Russians or to show any resistance. Most likely, after the Russians finished collecting information from these fields, they may start another major offensive in the direction of the settlement of the city of Volchansk, with the purpose to cut this pocket from Ukraine and to take this territory under complete control. Now let's move further. As for the southern direction, as for the Siversk direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just regular activities of the armored forces of Russian Federation, a lot of artillery strikes. The Russians were hunting and destroying Ukrainian positions, the Russians were attacking Ukrainian units with FPV drones, so just regular activities. Maybe the Russians do have some plans to begin a major offensive in this area as well, but as for now nothing tells us that this is going to happen today or tomorrow. As for the area between the city of Chasiv Yar and Toretsk, we got lots of very weird updates. First, let's discuss the city of Chasiv Yar. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians established control almost over the entire central part of the city, and the Russians improved their positions in the forest to the south. So as you can see, lots of territories were captured, and this information was provided us by neutral and by pro-Russian resources. The Russians are trying to enter the settlement of Shevchenka. If the Russians are able to get inside of this micro district, this will mean a complete collapse of Ukrainian defense, and most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to begin regrouping, and they will be forced to begin evacuation of their soldiers from the central part in the direction of the settlement of Mykolaiv, with the purpose to establish another defense belt and to slow down the Russians, at least here. Furthermore, the Ukrainians have already begun counter-offensive operation in the northern part of the city of Chasiv Yar with the purpose to unblock the roads, to unblock streets, to unblock buildings for those Ukrainians that are currently located in the central part. First, the Ukrainians unblocked this part. Now this allows the Ukrainians for probably better chances for successful evacuation along the railways from the city of Chasiv Yar in the direction of Kramatorsk-Slaviansk. Now let's discuss the situation in the city of Toretsk. During the previous 24 hours we got lots of very interesting updates, and they are very strange and weird. First, let's compare the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 24th of February. So as you can see, by the 24th of February, nothing was telling us that something big is going to happen during the next several days. The same story was on the 25th of February, but on the 26th of February, we got the first report from the Ukrainian sources that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to establish complete control over the northern part of the city of Toretsk. Based on several videos that were published by the Russian and by the Ukrainian side, we have adjusted this map in Ukrainian favor. But by the end of the 26th of February, we still had some doubts whether this is like a fresh video or whether it's just maybe like, I don't know, another pocket of resistance that the Russians were trying to cut. So it was very difficult to understand what exactly was happening there. But later on the 27th of February, we continue receiving different updates from this territory, and by the beginning of the 28th and by the end of the 28th of February, we got full picture and full information about the situation in this city. According to information we have, before the negotiation process between Donald Trump and Zelensky, the armed forces of Ukraine decided to carry out several counterattacks in the area of the city of Toretsk with the purpose to improve their negotiation positions during the meeting between Trump and Zelensky, and most likely the Ukrainians managed to achieve some goals. As you can see, the map has been changed significantly. Almost the entire northern part came in Ukrainian hands. Also, the Ukrainians tried to counterattack the Russians in the western part. Now we see that the defense line of the armed forces of the Russian Federation was broken. Now it's going to be very difficult for the Russians to hold their lines, because there are very high chances that if Ukrainians increase the pressure, they may caught in cauldron several Russian groups, and this can lead to complete collapse of defense. Obviously, we don't think that Ukrainians are planning to, for example, counterattack in this area with the purpose to restore control over the city of Toretsk. Obviously, the main purpose of the armed forces of Ukraine is to get better positions during the negotiation process, and Zelensky just wants to show that he still has power, that his army still has possibilities to counterattack and to show very good results. So obviously this counterattack in the area of Toretsk will be shown to the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, as the greatest victory over Russian army. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but if the situation continues developing the same way, most likely the Ukrainians will increase the pressure, because as for now we see that indeed they managed to improve their position significantly. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, and let's wait what the Russians are going to do with this, because now they need to bring additional forces here. Now they need to stabilize the situation, and most likely the Russians will be forced to bring forces from the area of the city of Chasiv Yar, because this is the nearest area where the Russians are in offensive, and they can use these operational reserves with the purpose to stabilize and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the territories they managed to recapture. As for the Pokrovsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. We got just a lot of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian positions in different towns in different parts of the city. No activities in the vicinity of Kotlina, Pischana, Shevchenka, so most likely both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, were regrouping. The most important updates are coming from the south. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to take under complete control the settlement of Zaporozhye. Furthermore, the Russians were trying to move even further in the direction of the settlements of Toretsk, and the Russians were trying to encircle the settlement of Preobrazhenka, but as for the end of the 28th of February, the Ukrainians managed to slow down the Russians and to repel several attacks carried out by the Russians and to force them to fall back. We have lots of videos how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians in this part, those soldiers that were trying to continue a further offensive along the river of Serebryanka. Let's compare the map. This is the map by the end of the 27th of February. This is the map by the end of the 28th of February. As you can see, we have adjusted just the contested area in Russian favor. Now let's discuss the situation in the south Donetsk direction. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we received significant number of icons with flags. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 icons with flags, which means that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly just during the previous 24 hours. Let's compare the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 27th of February. As you can see, the Russians were very far from the settlements of Privilna, Burlatskaya, Skudne, and by the end of the 28th of February, we see that the Russians improved their position significantly. The most most important, the village of Privilne was captured by the Russians, and this information was also confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. Furthermore, the settlement of Burlatskaya was also captured by the Russians, and as for this settlement, this information was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources, which is very important, related to the losses of the armed force of Ukraine. And several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the settlement of Skudne was also captured and secured by the Russians. So we see that the first defense belt on the Shevchenko direction collapsed under the pressure of the armed force of Russian Federation. Of course, we still haven't received even a single geolocation that can confirm Russian progress, but obviously we see that currently there is a very huge gap between the possible positions of the armed force of Russian Federation according to different mappers and according to different sources, and the territories that were geolocated under complete Russian control. And if we have such a gap like this, currently the distance of the gap at some points is already 4-5 kilometers, and usually if we have such a gap, this means that the Russians might be much further deep inside of the territory under Ukrainian control, and this is indeed another breakthrough, and we see that Ukrainian defense collapsed completely. Currently, it's very difficult even to understand where exactly the Ukrainians are planning to try to stop and to slow down the Russians, but due to this progress, most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to do this, or they need to bring some forces in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation. And the nearest positions that Ukrainians can use for stabilization is the Zaporozhye direction. But if Ukrainians decide to redeploy forces from the Zaporozhye direction in the direction of South Donetsk, then the Russians can begin another offensive operation here. And we know that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians have already begun advancing, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to secure the settlement of Petykhatki. And now we understand that the main purpose of Russian offensive in the Zaporozhye direction is to pin down Ukrainian operational reserves in this area and not to allow the Ukrainians to use them, for example, for the stabilization of the situation in the South Donetsk direction, which means that the Ukrainians will not do this. So that's why the Ukrainians will be forced to use these forces from somewhere else. Maybe the Ukrainians will redeploy some forces from the Pokrovsk direction, but if they do this, this will allow the Russians to, for example, intensify their activities here and to cut and to take more territories and maybe even to enter the Dnipro region. So the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, as I understand. For them, the main problem is where to find reserves to stabilize the situation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.